Huge thank you to Debs for having us here. My name's Jane Slater, as Debs has just said, and I'm here to talk about our Anyone's Child campaign. So we have drug policies in the UK that are over 50 years old and have never been subject to review. And so what our Anyone's Child campaign is really trying to draw out is the harms of those policies. You know, we have record levels of overdose. We've talked about it a lot today, but I would like you to take 1 minute as you leave the room today to reflect and look at those flowers at the back of the room that have been made by the brilliant members of our Anyone's Child campaign. Each one of those represents a life. You know, the depressing thing is we've got to make something like 700 more to make this year's drug death stats. How many times can we keep writing this same press release about this tragedy? Our prisons are full. We're clearly stigmatizing people who use drugs. Drug education isn't getting through. And what's really clear is drug use is not going away. And we have this contaminated supply that is causing so many of these drug deaths. So really what Anyone's Child as a starting point wants to do is let's have a conversation about how we can make drugs safer. And I think that's what we're all here today to talk about. And for Anyone's Child, that means that we need to be starting to think of drugs as the health issue that they are, not the criminal justice issue that they are not. And we need to get the market under control. And for us, that means doctors, pharmacists, licensed retailers taking control of this market. And I don't want to go into my transform mode, but there's tons of literature at the back to show that we've really thought about it. The evidence is there. Drug policies do not work. So let's start to think about how we can change that. And that is how Anyone's Child was born. We thought, we've got to put the humans back into this conversation. The evidence, the stats, they're stacked up and sitting there. So we need the people there. So, could I have a slide? Oh, I meant to do a slide. Sorry. Here we are, launching Anyone's Child back in 2015. We went to Parliament, which is where our drug policies are held. It was the then Prime Minister David Cameron in office. There weren't that many of us, but what we did is we put in a letter to David Cameron. We said, review our drug policies, and we're not going to go away until you change it. We're coming back every year. So it's created some work for me, that. Anyway, and now we're going to have a short film from the families to introduce themselves, because they'll do it best.
Anyone's Child is a group of families whose relatives have died, disappeared, or been locked up as a result of the war on drugs. We believe that drug policy causes more harm than drugs themselves. What has happened to our children could happen to anyone's child, which is why drugs need to be legally controlled and regulated. We never dreamed this would happen to us. We are a collective of families from around the world who see an urgent need for change. We believe that drugs are dangerous, and that's exactly why we want them legally regulated. We want governments, not gangsters, to control the drugs trade. We want to promote health, reduce crime, and protect all of our children.
If families work together, we can get change now. The time is right.
So thank you. We're going to hear from the amazing Campbell in a minute, but again, to really get a sense of the project, I thought, why am I doing this? I'm going to hand it over to another of the families. So I've got a second video from Hilary, who, you know, really what we wanted to do with Anyone's Child was capture a whole range of stories of how policies failed. And actually what the group is sort of made, most of the families involved within Anyone's Child have lost loved ones, but we also want to tell stories of the criminalisation, all of the harms that we know that families have. But anyway, this is another story, but it is a bit different to Claire's, which I thought might be useful to show.
There's ashes in there. It's got a little picture and a lock of hair in there. was married for 14 years and I had 4 children, 3 sons and 1 daughter. Ben was my oldest. We were very close right from the beginning. Ben was a very caring, loving, inquisitive person. Ben always struggled academically at school due to having a diagnosis of dyslexia and also later on ADHD. And being forced into a classroom to do something that you know that you will never be good at is quite soul-destroying. There was domestic violence between me and their dad, and him being the oldest, he wanted to protect me. And I think that was, again, sort of led down this path as well. One of the things about ADHD is that they're not thinking about consequences as much. His mind was always working at 100 miles an hour, and drugs, for that reason, could be attractive because they slowed it down. Obviously, I tried to talk to him about it. I tried to ground him, but it was terribly difficult because their father was a drug user, and that made it 10 times harder. Because he's their idol, he's who they look up to, and despite all the troubles in our marriage and them not liking what he was doing to me, they loved him. About 15, Ben was sent to prison because of drug-related crime, stealing and breaking and taking from shops. I couldn't quite believe it, but a little bit of me hoped that maybe it was a turning point. But prison didn't address his drug use. After, obviously, the initial shock, I wanted answers. I'd read up a lot online. I read how they support people in other countries. And also, I was reading the shocking statistics. Drugs are not going to go away. Fact, that's a fact. It's far better to accept this and try to make it as safe as possible. Since Ben's died, I've gone into a couple of schools talking about choices as much as the actual drugs themselves. Making them look at how their choices affect others and also looking at the reasons why they do it. If drugs had been regulated, we could have better education. Like with smoking and alcohol, you can talk freely about it.
Where was this again?
It was Monkey World. I've been campaigning with Anyone's Child for the last 3 years because I want to make a difference to other families that have been through what I've been through. It's given me a way of having mine and Ben's voice heard in a safe environment. And it's helped me make sense of what's happened and to make me feel not so alone.
It's fine. I don't think that's fine. Anyway, I hate speaking after these films. But initially when we launched Anyone's Child, to be honest, our aspirations for the campaign were really... Do you want me to start? Sorry. He needs slides. So initially when we set up Anyone's Child, I guess the goal of it, or in my head, like what I thought would be really useful to do was to try and get sensible reporting in places that perhaps as transformed we couldn't. So the target of this campaign was places like the Daily Mail, Cosmopolitan magazine, Take a Break, it's a bit snobbish, but anything I wouldn't really read, I thought, right, we want it in there. And actually, what I am really proud of is that happened really quickly, and because of we managed to find really sensitive reporters, and we have sensible reporting, and not all the time, don't get me wrong, we haven't changed that media message, but I think we've hopefully reached some new audiences through that. And another big goal was to just start having conversations. So we do public events up and down the country. We'll go anywhere where you'll have us. So do invite us along if you if you want a public event. And we bring out key stakeholders, and we try and talk not only about the need for regulated drug markets, which then people say, well, isn't that a long way off? We say, well, not if you start fighting for it, but also to look at what people can do tomorrow. So it's a whole range of the initiatives we've heard about today. We support drug safety testing, diversion schemes, heroin-assisted treatment, overdose prevention centres. We need to just get those in place tomorrow. Let's just save lives and start doing that now. But let's fundamentally have these bigger conversations. And what all these public events have shown is almost anyone who is close to this issue, when presented again with the evidence and the stories, many people can become convinced that this is a rational way forward. And I'm very proud that a lot of the families have been behind a lot of the innovations that we have currently seen to date in the UK. And a lot of them have been campaigning alongside places like The Loop in trying to help with some of that media messaging around it. But I think the thing I never really imagined when we started Anyone's Child was where our political impact could be. And as I said at the beginning, we're an international campaign. So I was very lucky back in 2016. And if we remember back to Adam's presentation earlier, he was talking about how this is all held at a UN level. Now, we went to the United Nations. They had a big review of drug policy back in 2016, a unsexily named thing called the UNGAS. Anyway, we went there, and we went there with a whole load of campaigners from all over the world, all with human stories, again, of this just devastation that's being caused. And when I was out there, we got a call one morning. We were sat in our Airbnb apartment having breakfast, and there was a call from the Health Minister of Canada, and she said, get yourselves to the UN today, which I haven't had many phone calls like that. Anyway, we ran into the UN, and the health minister stood up on the stage. She put up a picture of the Canadian mum I was working with, Donna May, her daughter, up on the stage, and she said this incredible speech where she basically, and I have the long quote, but anyway, who needs a quote? Basically, she said, look, I've met with experts, I've met with policymakers, I've met with so many people, but as this voice of this one mother has persuaded me that we must do better for the citizens of Canada. And as a result of that, Canada, I know, still have many hurdles to cross, but they have introduced a whole range of safe supply methods, and the conversation around the opiates crisis has very much advanced, really directly, and that was a real clear win for us, right? And so I have to admit, we came back to the UK and thought, right, we need a real good political strategy with this in the UK. When we started Anyone's Child, I think we had one MP that we could get out and support us publicly. Now, anyone who meets me will know that really the one thing I ask anyone who cares about this issue, if you're going to do one thing, write to your MP and get your MP in a room and have a meeting and say you need to do better. Because MPs are under no pressure to do anything about that, and they regularly tell me so. In fact, one of the things that frustrates me most campaigning in this field is they'll go, yeah, I completely agree. I'm not going to say that. Right? But what families do, when families go and meet them, and we have our political system is that if a constituent writes to their MP, they must reply. So remember that you can get meetings with these people. And I think, and this is me being politically sceptical, I think if MPs are there with families, it gives them a way to speak out on this issue. It is an issue that people are very frightened of speaking about. It is highly stigmatized. People worry about their political careers. People worry about how this is going to be reported in the media. But increasingly, we are finding MPs speaking out. And that is because they'll say, well, look, I met with my constituent, and this is the story that they told me. And I'm very proud that our Anyone's Child campaign has been mentioned in nearly every political debate that has happened in Parliament on the issue since we launched. We now have over 50 MPs, although many have lost office at the recent election. They signed up to our campaign around the Misuse of Drugs Act at its 50th anniversary and said we must review this. And so I believe we are changing the political narrative and making this a subject that people can talk about us. We have got challenges. I think the group needs to diversify further. I think we need to be telling more stories. We don't ever actually recruit for this campaign. It is very much something that we want people to find us, although occasionally I get asked to come and do things like this, which gives me an opportunity to promote us. But if you have a story or want to talk more about how drug policy impacts you, I want to urge you to start speaking out, have conversations. We need to break some of the taboos on this. There still very much are taboos, and it's only by getting out and campaigning that we start to switch this. Every year we hold a lobby of Parliament, and I have one more short video. Am I allowed a video? Thank you.
We're on our way to Parliament right now to meet our MPs in record numbers, since they are the people that have the power to change the drug laws. I've not been before, but it's really exciting to see what the day's going to be like.
My son's Jay McKnight, and then my friend who's here today, Pat Darville, her son was Christian Darville. We've got another friend whose son died, that's Anthony Deering, another friend who lost Daniel Riggs, and another friend, John Marcham. So those are the names that we managed to find in amongst all of these, but there are many more names. Looking at that, 4,517 avoidable drug-related deaths. And that just seems terrible, doesn't it? In Jay's case, he said, what's the point? I'm never going to get employed because I've got a drug history, I've got very little work history, a criminal record. And in the end, I think they just feel so hopeless that there's no way of ever getting out of that hole.
I'm here today because I believe that our current drugs policy is not fit for purpose and actually is harmful. And as someone who has a faith, I think it's a matter of social justice. People are not here to judge, they're here to stand in solidarity and to identify with others who've lost loved ones, friends, family. And I think, yes, it's taking a stand on an issue, but I think there's also an experience about being together, being part of something wider that actually really matters.
A lot of police who are using their racial bias and discrimination and using the illegality of it as a weapon to unfairly treat people, and as well the lives that are affected by the fact that it's not regulated in a way that it can be, and for people to take drugs safely is something that needs to be taken into consideration. I'm a little bit nerve-wracked to meet my MP, and I know there are arguments to the topic that can convince my MP, so I kind of look forward to sharing those points of view.
For arguments for progressive policies, because we have a long way to go in the Labour parties, we have a long way to go in the country.
And I very much support the work that you're doing.
That I agree with everything that my colleagues have said.
Thank you, we're with you. We got all the facts, all that we need to change the law. Hallelujah. We got all the facts, all that we need. Blessed be. We got all the deaths, more than we need to change our laws.
So look, before I hand over to Claire, join us. We'll be back in Parliament. June 26th is World Drug Day. We'll be heading out off that week at some point. It's also our 10-year anniversary next year, so we need to be there in record numbers. Please write to your MP. I know it's not what anyone wants to do, but it is what we need to do if we want to change this. And please have your voice. Speak out. We can do it. And now I will hand over to the amazing Claire Campbell, who I have to admit, I had to speak before her because thank you very much.
This could go very well, or it could dissolve, I'm afraid. There's a lot of what's been said, especially in Jane's presentation, that I haven't even touched on here, but does affect me very much. But this is a very synopsis of my story, of Luke's story. And I forgot to say thank you for inviting me. I didn't read the bit about presenting slides either, so I haven't got any, I'm afraid. On the night that Luke died, I'm sorry, I've got to read it because I'll lose it. He went out with friends to celebrate leaving full-time education. He'd just started his GCSEs. It was half-term, he was about to go on to study leave. Unbeknownst to us, he'd purchased some MDMA tablets for himself and a friend from a couple of other friends who were a year above him at school, who'd bought them on the dark web. We think probably this wasn't the first time, probably the second or third, maybe. Luke had purchased them from friends from schools. These friends weren't big drug addicts. They weren't dealers, they weren't kingpins. They were just a couple of school kids earning a bit of money, maybe to buy their own. It's hard. Luke would have been 24 just 6 days ago on the 20th of November. 24. And not a day goes by without thinking of him, of loving him, and of reliving that night. I'll come over it, I'll be fine in a minute. Every day feels like it was last night, every day. Through the small community of the town that we live, people became aware that Luke had collapsed. He'd gone out to an under-18s disco, no alcohol allowed. And through that network, they managed to get hold of myself. I think they actually got hold of my mum first, to tell me he'd collapsed and was being taken to hospital. He arrived at hospital at approximately 1:15 in the morning, and I was there not long after at all. The emergency team at the hospital worked ferociously hard, and I mean ferociously hard, to save his life. His heart was restarted, I think 4 times on his way in the ambulance, and twice once he was in resus. And although he was packed in ice, he was running a temperature of 40. Some memories of that night, visual memories, are razor sharp, and some bits blurring to the last 7.5 years, basically. Luke's sister joined us, Esther, and we were with him throughout that night, that early morning, and there was the most amazing thunderstorm Devon had ever seen, kicking and lightning and no rain. That was him fighting. Esther and I found anyone's child at some point in the months after Luke's death, not years, but months, and attended a meeting in Taunton. It wasn't long after Luke died, but I can remember sitting there and crying, just crying. As Jane said, everyone's child and the Loop lobby we lobby Parliament every year. And Esther and I join them with these lobbies, apart from obviously this year. My sisters joined me, my nephews joined us, one or two of Luke's friends have come along to the one in Bristol recently because we couldn't go to London. Last June, in 2023, I found the strength to talk on the green, as I'm talking to you now. It was a bit of a mess. Anyway, Luke died 7.5 years ago. He was 16.5 years old. As I say, he would have been 24 last week. And on that evening, I had my little granddaughter and I lit sparklers. And she talks about him, and she knows about him. The Misuse of Drug Act was introduced in 1971. That's 53 or 54 years old ago. And it hasn't really been addressed. Never really revisited. There have been some changes, but not where I'm looking. Luke died 46 years after the Misuse of Drug Act. Another one of our own, just one of our other only one's child family lost her daughter 42 years ago. And a mere 24 years after the Misuse of Drug Act, I remember as a new mum with a toddler, who is now Esther, a grown-up and a mother herself, reading the devastating story of Leah Bett's death. And that's just 3 deaths, just 3 that have really stuck with me in that 53-year history. And that's 3 deaths, just 3 that could have been avoided. And I think it's changed to focus on improving our children's lives and well-being through that act. I've worked within education for about 20 years now. There's very much, especially in the last few years, about safeguarding our children. And I feel the lack of accessible information regarding harm reduction through education, through our schools, through teaching, is not safeguarding our children. Lots of double negatives. Just to say no doesn't work, never did. Or the other words like Frank and whatever's on the back of the toilet doors and all the rest of it are just lame excuses of the box ticking to address drug education in schools through PSHE lessons. It breaks my heart every year when I see new families join the one club I wish I'd never heard of, anyone's child. But I am a member. And Luke would have been too, and he'd have been banging a much louder drum than me had he survived. He didn't suffer fools, and our consecutive governments have proved themselves fools for not listening to those who have suffered at the willful refusal to address this outrageously out-of-date policy. Now, through the lobbying, I've met 2 consecutive Conservative MPs. I'll be meeting a Labour one June 25. And I have met with them, and I have spoken to them, and they have gone away and done some research. And whatever, I feel, whatever they have thought personally, they're not allowed to advocate harm reduction in schools. So, 2023, I met with Selene Saxby, our Conservative MP for Devon, North Devon. And I asked her, why isn't drug education in school? And she listened to me. She saw that very picture. She also saw the one that you might have seen very briefly of him alive. And then she saw that one. And she went away, and she did ask the question of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and this is literally a few sentences I've highlighted, his response to her. It is vital to help to crack down on illegal activity. From an educational perspective, in your we have youth engagement officers working with the schools on drug prevention. There is also schools under their PSHE programme. One of the risks of drugs, they talk about diverting youngsters away from drugs, youngsters taking drugs in criminality, and the higher risk to students. So it's all quite negative, not quite positive. Now, if you bear with me, because I didn't print it off, if I can get this up, I've got a précis of a response from one of those crime responding officers, if I can get it right, if you give me a minute. This is from a police officer called Kevin, who worked, well, you're here. Luke Campbell passed away in May 2017 at North Devon District Hospital after taking drugs obtained from friends who'd purchased them online. In the summer of 2017, I was working as a youth offending team constable with the Devon and Cornwall Police. The friends were arrested and taken to court. In March 2018, I met Luke's mother and his sister Esther at Exeter Crown Court. In the courtroom, Claire and Esther did something unexpected. They asked for Luke's friends, who had sold them the drugs, to be spared from prison. They made a witness statement, pleading for the harm to stop. That day, then and there, awfully aware that their own pain would continue. Over the months, we organised a conference where everyone could share their experiences, and that was the boys. We always call them the boys. Esther and myself, the boys' parents, and the police that were involved. Not just Kevin, but also the lead detective. Everybody was involved, and we just sat around in big circles. Kevin goes on to say, it was the hardest day of my career. Luke's story continues to resonate with me, and his family use it to educate and safeguard others. Their approach to restorative rather than retribution, which is truly inspiring, and I strive to embody compassion in my work just as they do. And this is from me. Kevin continues to work with us to enable the right education about harm reduction to be heard in our schools. And recently, he was able to put a short programme made by the BBC into one of our local secondary schools, where over 900 pupils viewed it. And then, this is it. It's the last picture of my son. He died at 5:15 in the morning of the 17th of May, 2017. He was 16 and a half years old. Thank you.